Well, it's certainly not the only way forward, so that's absolutely certain. It is one part of the strategy because climate change doesn't know any country borders. So that basically means that we have to sit together and find sort of a consensus or a concept how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how to tackle climate change, which is unfortunately constantly accelerating in a really terrifying pace at the moment. So yes, states have to sit together and find a solution how to address this. And yes, this platform is a platform where industrialized nations have to take the responsibility and where developing countries can express their interest and say very clearly that they have not caused the trouble. So please, you industrialized countries, would you please get your things sorted? Because you are creating the trouble which we are suffering most from at the moment. So yes, this platform is extremely important for states to sit together, for mutual agreements between the states, but it's certainly not the only one. I tell you the truth, if it was the only one, I would be frustrated because the process in the last 18 COPs had been slowing down and it constantly slows down, and I'm actually very skeptical if we are at all able to speed this up and just accelerate the process up here from Doha. So it's certainly not the only chance to address future generations' interests.
I mean, do you get the impression that NGOs, that some developing countries and the general population are perhaps losing faith in the process, in the COP process?
Yeah, we have different movements. The population understands more and more the impacts of climate change and the causes of climate change, namely the combustion of fossil fuel and their influence in that. So the public perception is we really have to do something. We really have to address this subject now. More and more NGOs have embarked on this strategy on sort of highlighting this threat and making the case for the interdependence of the various subjects. As we know, climate change is not only an environmental problem, it is related to social issues, to human rights issues. So NGOs have understood this, which is why they're here and why they're trying to put pressure upon the politicians. So this is the one movement, which is the upwards movement. The downward movement is the political will from the decision makers to tackle this and to address climate change at the UN platform at the moment. So there is definitely a certain misbalance, which is unfortunately increasing.
I mean, you said you would be frustrated if this were the only way, the only place in which we were dealing with climate change. What gives you hope? What stops you becoming totally frustrated?
What gives me hope is what's going on the national levels and on the regional levels. In particular, let's look into the development of the renewable energy technologies. If you would have told me 10 years ago that a country like, let's say, Germany would be able to increase its amount of renewable energy, its total share of renewable energy electricity, only within 10 years from 3 to 25%. If you would have told me that this country would create 380,000 jobs out of that business, I would have said you're absolutely crazy. That's not gonna happen within 10 years. Give me 50 years and I do that. So, but that's actually the trajectory of the country of Germany on the renewable energy development. And that was because of a 6-page policy, basically was the game changer that suddenly empowered people to produce their own electricity out of the energy that just surrounds us, sunlight, wind. And that was the big game changer. And now if you see in those constituencies which are having gone down a similar road, they have a similar development and they have a similar positive development of the total share of renewable electricity. So this, just for one example, this gives me hope, and this is why the World Future Council very much focuses on empowering parliamentarians, empowering policymakers to implement these kind of future just policies that really, really put change on the ground, that really, really make a difference and not just talk.
Are we moving fast enough on the ground? I mean, the scientific advances, the empowerment of rural communities. I mean, there's a huge amount of work being done across the world. But is it fast enough? Is it progressing quickly enough to counterbalance perhaps the lack of political will among our politicians?
No, it's not fast enough. If you look at the increase of CO2 emissions in the last years only, I mean, we've been all terrified by the IPCC report in the year 2007. And if you now look 5 years back, nothing has changed. The trajectory of the CO2 emissions is constantly increasing. It's even worse than the IPCC expected. So no, we're not fast enough with all the change. But the positive thing is that we have quite impressive examples of countries that have taken a different road and that have implemented policies to, for example, develop renewable energy, just as Spain, just as Denmark, just as Germany, but also increasingly countries in the developing world have implemented these policies that now can make a difference. So we're not fast enough, but there are quite a few beacons of hope in the various parts of the world that I think where we should be focusing on and identifying them and making them applicable for other constituencies and for other countries as well.
What's the bare minimum you would like to see of the World Future Council and yourself personally at the end of these 2 weeks of negotiations?
Well, I think it is hard to ask me that question because I'm really a bit frustrated about the current process. If you would have asked me that question in Copenhagen, I would have said we need, we need commitments from the industrialized country for an emission reduction target between 25 or 40%. We need a clear commitment where the money should come from for adaptation funds and for mitigations fund for developing countries. At the moment, I'm a little bit skeptical about what is at all possible to come out of this conference. But if you ask me on my wish list for this conference, I would say at least we have to have a clear idea where the money for the Green Climate Fund will come from. As you know, from 2020, there's been agreed $100 billion every year up from the year from 2020 for mitigation and maybe also adaptation, but nobody knows where the money should come from. So they have agreed, yes, we're going to pay for it, but we don't know where to take it from. So we need a clear idea and a clear roadmap towards the 2020 target for the Green Climate Fund, because that's one of the few things I think can really come out of this process at the moment, that there is the Green Climate Fund because it is approved. It's now clear that it's been established or that it will be established in South Korea and Seoul. So this is something that gives me hope because it can hopefully then channel financial funds from industrialized countries to developing nations to support them in their policies.